Hi, this is Kelly Forden. I'm here today with Christie Hodgen. She is the editor-in-chief of New Letters magazine. She is also one of my all-time favorite authors. To give you an indication of how much I love her work, when her book Elegies for the Brokenhearted came out in 2010, I think I gave it to everybody I know that Christmas. And then I put her on Google search, where she's remained just she and George Saunders. So if that gives you some indication of how much I loved that book in particular and all of her work. Christie is the author of 4 books of fiction: A Jeweler's Eye for Flaw, Hello, I Must Be Going, Elegies for the Brokenhearted, and Boy Meets Girl. Her short fiction and essays have appeared in dozens of magazines. Her awards include a grant from the National Endowment for the Arts, the AWP Prize in Short Fiction, the AWP Prize for the Novel, and a John Simon Guggenheim Memorial Fellowship. Thanks also to Michael Nye of Story Magazine, who made this story available for the entire month of May for all of our listeners. I really appreciated that, and that is such a fantastic magazine. And please consider subscribing to Let's Deconstruct a Story. We would love to interview people every day of the week if we could, but the audio engineering adds up and the time and effort. So if you enjoy this podcast and you want to support it, we would love that. Thanks also to Elliot Bansell. He is our wonderful audio engineer. And now for the show. So I'm so thrilled. I'm so excited to talk about the story. And I already recorded like an intro and everything so that we could just jump right in. That I'm such a huge fan, and that I bought Elegies for the Brokenhearted for everybody I knew. And it's so rare for me for something to stay with me that long and affect me.
That time, yeah.
It has, but I mean, I swear it's only a handful of books I've read that have had that impact on me. So thank you.
So nice to hear. Thank you so much. It didn't do, much, and
really,
yeah, I mean, it did okay, but
yeah.
it never quite went anywhere, and so it's always nice to hear.
Oh my gosh, I can't believe it. Well, maybe it'll have a resurgence soon because it deserves it. Congratulations for the Pushcart Prize for this story. Michael Nye.
That came out of nowhere. That was great.
Oh my gosh. Well deserved. Okay, so I guess we'll jump right in. It's 13,000 words, which is a long story. I'm just curious about the path of the story itself. Was that hard to place because it's so long?
I feel like there are maybe 10 magazines you can send to with a story that long. And I just seem to be trying my best not to get published anymore because I'm not writing novels, but I'm not writing stories under 20 pages. I'm in this weird space where it's a 40-page story. Alaska Quarterly is another journal that will take something long. I have a novella in there, but I'm down to just a handful of places to submit.
Wow.
Michael was so great. Michael Nye at Story, he was just so generous about giving it that much space. I really appreciated it.
Well, I think it's great, though, that you just stuck with your vision and you weren't sidelined by that, because I think a lot of people try and conform to whatever the market is looking for, which is very sad, in my opinion.
I mean, it's probably the advice I would give a student, right?
Right.
Because you have to make yourself fit into certain parameters. But I guess I'm just old enough that I'm just kind of doing what I want at this point.
Well, and the story is all about that too, right? Yeah. Okay. So I love that it starts in 1999 because I think we're around the same age. And I remember it so well. Just that feeling of dread and nobody knew what was going to happen next. And so I guess I'll just start with an overarching question of the genesis of the story. How did it first come to you?
Yeah, like you, I remember that. I almost have the feeling that no one else, when you teach, you're around young people, and it's impossible to explain that people thought the world might end, because of a computer glitch. It seems silly now, but that really was, even on Time magazine, it was sort of being treated seriously. It felt there's a lot of dread. I have a 22-year-old right now, and I'm looking at the landscape. That person's entering into. And that's got to feel awful. I think it's probably even worse now to be 22.
I can't even imagine. I've got
Yeah.
20-year-olds, 22 to 30. I have 4 kids, and
Yeah.
I can't imagine. Yeah.
Yeah. I think I was thinking about that. This was quite some time ago, trying to remember what that felt like. I was working on a different piece. It was an essay called 1999, and I had a little piece of writing that I had sat down and just cranked out one morning about what it felt like to be young in 1999. And I don't think I ever fully used that in the essay, but it was just hanging around in a computer file. And then I found it again, and I was at the time working at a bookstore, and so the story just kind of grew from there. It definitely came from a feeling of trying to describe to other people what it was like a long time ago.
Well, and it felt very real. I mean, just the feelings of all the 20-year-olds, like what they thought that life was going to be like. And I wondered if you really closely paralleled their experiences with the books that you mentioned, because it took me a while to actually look up the books. I should have done that first, because then I would have gotten it earlier. But can you tell me a little bit about those books that you mentioned in relation to, and I can
Sure. Oh, no, I remember.
yeah.
That was real. That was 24-year-old angst, right? I was working a job for $4.15 an hour. I
Unbelievable.
was surrounded by books, and there was an adult much older than the rest of us who had been there his whole life and was leading what, by necessity was a very modest life. And I think if that's the trajectory you're on, you're going to be attracted to Sad Heart at the Supermarket by Randall Jarrell, which is asking the question, like, what is the value of a well-lived life? It seems to only be commerce, and this was back in the 60s. He was writing this, or even the 50s, and he was looking around and saying, really, how well you're doing, how well you're thought of, how smart you are just equates with how much money you make. And so
Wow.
if you're living that $4 an hour life, of course you're going to be reading that. And the
Right.
question that's being asked in that book is, if you're so smart, why aren't you rich? And that's what it felt like. I felt like I might have something going on in my head that might be of value, but I couldn't equate it to security or.
So the person in real life, in what ways were they parallel to Roy, or were they really living that life of just reading and being happy with
So it
really?
seemed, yeah, we had a great bookstore manager. We all loved him and looked up to him. And there comes that time when you think, can I really do this for decades?
Right.
None of us
Could do
did.
it.
We all bailed.
And was it really in Kentucky, or did you pick that location? It was in Kentucky. Okay.
But,
Interesting. And that was when Seabiscuit came out, because I went to
yeah,
Kenyon. Laura Hillenbrand went to Kenyon. I didn't know her there, but we have mutual friends.
it's a
So
great book.
yeah, it is a great book, but it's funny that I forgot that that's when it came out. And then the leash, Thornstein Veblen's, is that how you say it? Veblen?
Theory of the Leisure Class.
Yes. And then I thought the Studs Terkel book, the characters in your story almost parallel all those different people answering the questions. Like book 9 recounts the narratives of a tree nursery attendant, a carpenter poet, an editor, an industrial designer, a nun, an ex-salesman, whatever. So I was just curious, were you consciously thinking, I'm going to chronicle how different people in different occupations perceive the world and commerce, or were you just absorbed it and then?
I mean, at that point, I worked in a bookstore and I would take home a book, I wouldn't say every day, but close to it, and was just reading everything I could get my hands on. And yeah, working was one of those just books that just sort of, blew the doors off. I don't think I was consciously thinking so much about profession so much as just, what is it like to be young? What is it like to have no security net of any kind, nor any promise of building one? And yet somehow I didn't even realize that or care. And that
Wow.
feeling is now gone, right? I mean, I have 3 kids, a mortgage, and to some extent, it's a bittersweet thing to think about. I loved the freedom of being young. I was responsible for no one. I only had to feed myself and keep a roof over my head. And I could read all day if I wanted to, which is what I did. But I didn't know what I didn't know. And now I know that I was one banana peel away from, complete Brooklyn, right?
Right. It's a good thing you don't understand it at that age.
Yeah.
But I was really drawn to, when I was looking up working, there was one thing I was drawn to in terms of this story where, or someone answering the question of like, what's your life like, said you recognize yourself as a marginal person, as a person who can give only minimal assent to anything that is going on in this society. I'm glad the electricity works. That's about it. What you have to find is your own niche that will allow you to keep feeding and clothing and sheltering yourself without getting downtown. I didn't know what they meant by getting
Yeah.
downtown. Yeah, you can't live that way forever unless you're committed to living like Roy did and having no one in your life. Like there's the picture in his house of the girl, and we don't know if it was his sister, girlfriend. We don't.
Yeah, that's where things are a little different. The real life Roy had a family and a good dad, and so I had to change that for the story to work. But as I've gotten older, I'm surrounded by people who make lots of money. I've equated sort of getting older with sort of a greater understanding of like how much it takes to feed your kids, and I'm sure those were questions that the real life Roy was troubled by too.
Mhm.
In this country, we weren't so tied to what we make, and the quality of our life was not so tied to what we make, but it is.
That's a question I kept having when I was reading it. Like, is this uniquely American? This attitude, well, my son lives in Germany now, and, you have medical care there. You don't have to worry about that. You'll be taken care of when you retire. And you make far less money, but you can live well. And he has the sense there that people work to live rather than living to work like we do. And
Mhm.
so it's a different feeling. Well, let's talk about each of the characters. Okay, so we have Oscar Wilde. Okay, when you were mapping out the characters in this story, were you consciously trying for different types of characters? Because you start with the we, like the first person plural in the beginning, so it's kind of a collective, and then it narrows down to the 4 MFA students pretty much, right?
Mhm.
That you stick with. What were your thoughts when you were creating each of them? Like, were there specific needs that you felt each one had to fill, or did that come about organically?
Well, there's always a character that's basically me, so,
Is
that's
that the
pretty
poet?
easy to identify, yeah. So that was pretty much my experience, and then, there was this sort of a cast of characters that I worked with at the time, and the story just kind of ends up telling you what it needs in order to make something to happen, so I
Mhm.
kinda needed a quiet one who was always writing things down to sort of serve as the secret narrator for the piece, even though it's voiced in the we.
Right.
And then I needed someone who was going to bail and go off and live that kind of quiet life, and then I needed someone who was secretly rich the whole time, and
Who
and
had no
be
problems.
right, that would be
Right.
sort of an engine driving the plot later. So that's just sort of all sorted out as I was, working out the plot, and I found that to be true in life, like, sometimes you just have people who are always gonna be okay, and they always were and always will be, and then some people who struggle, some people who disappear, some bonds last, others don't, so just looking back from being 51 years old on that, you can see that a little bit more clearly.
Yeah, and you never have a time in your life where there is that collective again. Like they were all together no matter what their situation was. And then the rest of the story, it feels like they're all very isolated. The soulful one, I felt so bad that he'd witnessed that twice. And then the quiet one, he just chose, which so many people choose, that practical life, waiting
Yep.
to retire. And then Oscar Wilde, he's rich and he could do whatever he wants, but he's also isolated and, smoking and just hanging out by himself. And
Yeah, I can't think of many people who haven't sort of scattered off into some brand of loneliness,
I know.
no
It
matter
does
which
feel
path they took,
I don't why is that?
I
Everybody
don't
feels
know.
lonely.
I don't know.
I feel that too. And it's interesting because I've talked to people who've written sad stories and I've written sad stories. And then you'll meet like a reader out in the world and they'll say, like, why did you write this? Like, it's so sad. And I feel that it's so true. Like, it's just true. You're not recreating the world, you're not wrapping it up in a bow.
Yeah, young people tend to say, "Oh, how did you come up with that?" And you just kind of want to say, "Well, just wait,
Yeah, exactly.
call me when you're 50."
Right. It's the soulful one who's in Alaska, right? Yeah,
Mm.
like teaching. And I love the fact that some of the students still have that light in their eyes. And he, is like, well, if it's out already at this point, you're kind of doomed because. So, what do you think kept the poet going? Like, is it just the dedication to craft and.
I think about this a lot. Jokingly, I make dark comments all the time, like the world's on fire. But I personally just seem to have an optimistic outlook, and despite all evidence to the contrary, still think
In the
things are going to work
stories?
out. Yeah. So I think the poet is naive and definitely portrayed as naive in several places in the story.
Right.
And yet the question becomes like, what's the alternative? You could look around you and very well conclude, I shouldn't be a believer. There's nothing to put your faith in anymore. And I've hit patches of that for sure, but where do you go from there? I mean, is
Right.
everything just ruined? So here's the central question for me with this horse race at the end of the story. This is a
Yes.
saw live. Not I wasn't there, but I saw it on TV as it was happening. And I watched a cheap horse. He was not one of these $1 million conglomerate horses. He was I don't know, $50,000 horse or whatever he was. Not very expensive. 80 to 1 and he won. And I still can't figure out whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. Because when a long shot wins, the rest of us who are long shots in life think,
Yeah.
happen and sustains us, right? But
Right.
in reality, most of the time, the multi-million dollar conglomerate horses are going to win. And
Right.
so giving people this belief that Rich Stripe can win, it buoys you tremendously, right? It feels great. But does it just sustain a system where the people who have the money are pretty much always going to win? And maybe they'll feed you a win every now and then, just so often as to keep you a believer and not rise up, right? So this is what this horse race represents to me: is you
That
watch
makes
this long
total
shot win.
sense.
Yeah.
Right.
And it felt good for sure. I've had many people watch this race and they said it felt so good to see this little guy come in at the last second. And yet, is that not the thing that's sustaining this system wherein like we basically are never going to win? You know?
Right. 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 If we didn't believe that, we would make everything much more equal. Like, right? We'd take care
Yeah.
of everybody. We'd say, like, it's never going to work out for you. That is so fascinating because we do have that. And that is the American backdrop. That's our modus operandi. Like, you can come here and you can do anything you want and you can be anyone
I
you want.
always believed that. And
Right.
some part of me still does. But
No, you have to have so many advantages and privileges to succeed. I was just watching Ocean Vuong talking to Oprah and how he was like crying. He was so emotional that she'd chosen his book because he'd been a kid in his mother's nail shop, I think. And every time Oprah would come on and she'd talk about a book, the women would like perk up and they'd walk to the bookstore and they'd have kind of
yeah,
like looking like they had hope, and yet Ocean Vuong is the only person who got out. Like he's a genius, right? And I think that's why he was crying too. I don't know that, but, but that made me
I
cry
need to
too.
watch
Like,
that. Yeah.
right? Yeah, it's true, but it's only true for the exceptional.
Yeah.
Okay, when you started it, did it just start in the collective naturally? And I love the fuck it. Can you talk about fuck
Sure.
it?
Yeah, I'm not someone who, curses for shock value, but I really believe that that was the vibe, so to speak, of being, young in 1999. Like, should we invest in the future or not? You're being told by serious people that the world economy could collapse, right? And there really was just this feeling of, well, fuck it. Like I had just come out of grad school. I had no sense of a future for myself. I didn't have any direction to go in. And plus, we're being told, and it wasn't just the Y2K computer problem. There was all this religious fanaticism going on. Like, it's the rapture, right? And even
And
though I
here
didn't
we are
believe that,
again.
yeah, it was like, oh, well, maybe. And so you wonder what is the correct response to this? And for a lot of people, I think it was like, why bother? Why invest? So fuck it is sort of the mantra at the beginning of the story, and actually it carries through to the end of just like, fuck this. Like I've tried so hard and I'm still going to get squashed. And that's why the story, I think, ends with, this race is happening. It's unfolding. It looks like this long shot's going to win. And the poet's like, fuck it. I don't even want to look at that, because if I believe again and it doesn't work out, that's going to kill me.
And you get to that stage in life, like where there's one too many, and then you're kind of done. And I've seen that happen to so many people. It seems to be happening from the 50s on up, where someone's just like, okay, I guess no, it's not going to happen. So how many different endings did you write before you ended on that moment?
I couldn't figure out how to end it. Other than that, I didn't want, almost every sports movie is built such that like a ragtag bunch of misfits band together and win in the end,
Right.
And I did not want any part of that. Having the horse win, which of course he did in real life, I didn't want in the story, because then you have to sort of reverse engineer everything so that it looks like it's building toward this argument for believing. And I don't actually know if that's correct. So I knew that the ending couldn't be there. And so I wrote right up to that point and didn't know what to do, and then realized that's where you stop. So endings that drive me crazy in life as a reader, Chekhov's Lady with the Little Dog, like they end with like, they knew some solution was possible, but what? That's the ending. And you're like, well, what was it? But you never find out,
Well, crazy in a good way or crazy in a bad way?
It drives me crazy. And then I can't stop thinking about it. So I think probably that's a good way, because with stories, we want to really get to people. And if you wrap everything up, then they can sort of stop thinking about it. So I guess, not consciously, but I guess that's probably what I was driving at, is like, what matters isn't whether the horse wins or not. What matters is what's at stake.
Right. Yeah. Fascinating. I just, because I got to the end and I was like, wait, wait, is she going to be rescued? But of course, a part of me already knew she's not going to be rescued either way, because she's going to have $80,000 and maybe that'll save her for a year, but then she'll be right back.
Nothing. Yeah.
It means nothing. Yeah. She'll
with
maybe get out.
And yeah.
Right. Right. So when getting back to Roy really quickly, I thought there was a lot about perception in his storyline as well, because we don't know when he kills himself, because everybody listening should have read the story, so there are spoilers. We don't know if he kills himself because he regrets his entire life, or he kills himself because that chronic cough means he's very ill and he's loved his life up to that point, and he's just choosing to do his own thing again. I love that, because I was really pondering that a lot. What were you thinking with his storyline?
It's the same as the ending. You don't know. And the not knowing is such a hard place to live. And I just feel like that's what life keeps delivering you in one way or another. We all lose people, and you just
don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah. So to a certain extent, you have to make up your mind what you're going to believe, despite everything that's happening, because you don't know much.
Yeah.
Is that what you're thinking? Yeah. I was thinking about the amount of money we were making back in those days doing jobs like that. Well, I was also thinking about, I worked in a bookstore briefly too, and and people would come in and they would never be picking out the books that we want. And then there was a really cerebral guy who worked in the bookstore after me, and he would just put up books I love, like Maggie Nelson's Bluettes and
Oh,
whatever,
yeah.
and write these long, stories about how great they were, and they just walk right past them and buy like a cookbook. Or it's so discouraging.
It
I thought it was going to
definitely,
be great to work at a bookstore, but I found it
it was
discouraging.
not great. Yeah. It's funny the way my sympathies have shifted, though. I was the same. I wanted everyone to walk off with these Marxist tracts, and now I'm older. I know, like, people just want to escape. I sympathize with those readers now in a way that I did not before, and I sympathize with even the owners who it was easy to sort of vilify for, making the bookstore a toy store that happened to have books. They're just
Right.
responding to what people are likely to buy, and they're trying to survive. And so I see all sides of it now in a way that I didn't at the time. But yeah,
Yeah.
it definitely was a letdown working in that environment. But it, again, as we were talking about early, everything just comes down to commerce.
Right. Yeah. So in this story, at some point, did you think it would be possibly a novel, or did you always think it might be a short story?
I guess I could have tried for a novel. I didn't think it could sustain it. And I also don't know that I personally wanted to put that much time into it and live in that space for that long.
Yeah.
I was working on a nonfiction book at the time I wrote this, and this was sort of the relief for the book length project. So I wanted it to be short.
Okay.
Yeah.
Did you know a lot about horse racing?
I wouldn't say I know a lot, but I learned how to read the racing form when I worked in that bookstore because our manager really was a real enthusiast, and we did go to the track a few times. And then after I left Louisville, I kept up with the Derby, well, the Triple Crown races. I
Okay.
always still watch. In fact, 2 weeks ago I watched the Derby, and Saturday I'm going to be in front of the TV watching the Preakness. So I do still follow it.
Oh, that's nice. Yeah. It's interesting. What is that called? The bit is called the snaffle.
A snaffle.
Yeah. And I thought that was, like a very cool metaphor for the things that control us in life, because this huge animal is just controlled by this little thing in his mouth. And if he could actually comprehend that, he could
Yeah.
escape this situation.
I know I'm torn about my interest in racing because I really just love horses. I just think they're the most beautiful animals in the world. And when you think about the control that they're under, and a lot of horses get injured and die, and that to me seems to indicate I should probably not follow horse racing. But I can't help it.
Right.
I love watching them.
Right.
It's a bad addiction.
So, of everybody in the story, who do you feel like fares the best of the whole crowd?
Oh, wow. That's a good question. I think to some extent the soulful one is off in Alaska and teaching English and seems pretty happy. Although I think from the outside, everyone would say lonely. I don't think money really ends up saving Oscar Wilde. He's comfortable, but lost. And I think the quiet one, who's a lawyer, is waiting for his life to get good. And maybe it will. There's at least still the chance that it might. I can really only identify with the poet because that's pretty much the path my own life has taken. I feel very rich in many ways, mostly having to do with my children. I also feel sometimes like most of what I do is a fool's errand.
You do.
Yeah.
Well, so because I'm such a huge fan, I know that your dad was a poet. Is that
Mhm.
right? What did you learn from that, from his trajectory as a poet or being an artist, growing up with an artist in the family? Because I didn't have that, and I'm just
Mhm.
curious.
He was just getting started when I still lived in the house. He was sending off to journals but didn't have a book yet. I definitely remember him opening, manila envelopes. That's how we used to do things.
Yes, I
Um,
remember.
and taking what was, his material out and reading and saying, yeah, I got rejected. And so I was aware that there were people who wrote things and that most of the time that effort met with, you know,
Yes, rejection,
came up against
rejection.
the wall. Yeah. But then occasionally he started publishing things. So I kind of knew that that was out there. the belief, the persistence, again, it's all tying back to earlier, like, do you believe? Do you keep believing? Like, he just has the type of observant soul and spirit that is engaged with the world and is looking for meaning and has never stopped. He's still teaching, he's still writing and publishing poetry. I sometimes wonder how he is still at the age of 78 earnestly waking up every day and trading. You know,
Right.
I hope that I'm still like that in 40 years, but I don't know. It's that question of belief. Like, how do you keep getting up and doing it?
Yeah, I think there's something you have to have some sort of, I want to call it delusion, but I don't think that's the proper term. But like as an artist, because you can, or at least this is me, right? I can see my submittal. I see that ratio of rejections to acceptances, and still, every time you get an acceptance, it's like, oh wow, okay, let's keep. And
Do this
it's
again
sort of
tomorrow. Yeah.
it's kind of sad, but if you can like maintain this delusion, you're kind of happy in your bubble. It's sort of a weird. I mean, I hope it's not like a narcissistic thing, but
Oh,
it
I
is in
wonder
a
about
way.
that too. I think at its best, you can be contributing to a larger conversation of, meaning making and um,
Right.
all good things. And then at its worst, yeah, it's maybe you're just maybe a little bit too much in love with yourself. I worry about that too.
So, what have you been? And this is my last question, but because I'm such a huge fan, I had you on Google search after Elegies for the Brokenhearted, and I have George Saunders on Google search. Like
Oh,
that's it.
wow.
You and George.
Okay.
Okay, so and then I was like, okay, where's the next book? And then I thought, well, maybe she's having kids like me, and it's yeah, okay.
Yeah, I have a nonfiction manuscript out in the world right now.
Is
That
that being? You mean you're shopping it, or
mhm,
it's okay?
yeah, and then
Okay,
I'm finishing another story set in Kentucky that also involves horses. But yeah, my
nice.
production is slowed a bit. I edit a literary journal now, so I spend a lot of time reading other people's stuff, which is kind of nice.
Right.
Um, but yeah, no, I'm still working. We'll
And
see.
you've got a novel in the works too, or no? Or just short
Um,
stories?
I have a collection of short stories that's done that I need to get out there, a nonfiction book that's done, and I'm now currently working on another really bloated long story that probably is going to be difficult to place.
No, no, I hope not. I hope not. Well,
Thanks.
thank you so much. This was really fun, and I love the story, and I know everybody else will too. So I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. I love talking to you. Thank you.
Okay, okay. Bye.
Bye.